Sat down earlier in the day with Treasurer Frydenberg and I asked him if this deal struck by Seven West Media is a sign of more to come.
Certainly that's the hope. This is big news, this is good news, and it's a precursor to what we think will be more commercial deals between Google and ideally Facebook as well and the news media businesses. It's been the product of more than 2 years of hard work by the ACCC, and I want to pay credit to Rod Sims and his team for coming up with a framework that is world leading, that is evidence based, and that will see news media businesses paid for generating original content. It's always been about dealing with this unequal bargaining power position between the parties, and the code that we have introduced into the Parliament has a number of key features. It's a mandatory code, it takes into account two-way value exchange, and it has a final offer arbitration mechanism. And it's been very clear over recent days that Google and Facebook are in very productive and constructive talks with the commercial players, and that these deals are occurring.
You've spoken to Mark Zuckerberg and also the Google chief. Have they requested and have you offered any concessions over the last couple of days that might be reflected in the bill when it goes to Parliament?
We've talked about making some clarifications, some technical amendments that I have been working through with the Prime Minister and Minister Fletcher, as well as my other colleagues, and of course been in close contact with Treasury and the ACCC. So we'll make those technical amendments public over the course of the next few days.
Nothing significant that might see the bipartisan support in trouble? They'll still back it?
These are improvements to the bill. These are technical in nature, but they also clarify the position of the government. And I think that they provide comfort to the players that we've got a workable code.
One of the elements when you get down to it, like the Google deal with Seven talks about its news showcase product as opposed to the search engine. Now, the search engine is the one that we all use every day. Will you then designate the news showcase product essentially as the instrument under the bill as opposed to the search engine? And does that diminish the value with which the news media is being paid here?
Well, ultimately, these are commercial deals that have been struck, and the whole purpose, the motivation behind the code has been to encourage, to enable, to foster these commercial deals to be struck. So it is our intent to legislate the code, to bring it into force, but at the same time to have these commercial deals in place to the satisfaction of both parties. And so that is what we're focusing on. But let's hope the Parliament passes the legislation in the coming days. With respect to the designation of search or Facebook, they're decisions that I would make after receiving the advice of the ACCC. But if there are commercial deals in place, then that becomes a different equation for me.
But does that diminish the value with which news media is paid?
No.
If it's going to be a Google news showcase product as opposed to the much wider used search engine?
I think you'll find that the deals that are being struck between the digital giants and the news media businesses are pretty comprehensive. They're beyond a search or a showcase product. In some cases, they are more comprehensive. And so I'll wait for those commercial deals to be struck and to be subsequently announced. But the main development that we've seen over the course of today with the Channel 7 Google deal is that the parties can reach a mutually beneficial outcome. Now, they've reached that outcome because the code is there and the code's about to be brought into law. But I have to say that my discussions with Mark Zuckerberg as well as with Sundar from Google have been very constructive.
So Google won't be packing up the stumps and pulling stumps and going home? Doesn't look like it.
I think the fact that they've made a deal is testament to their commitment to the Australian market, and that has been a clear message from Sundar in the discussions with the Prime Minister, Minister Fletcher and myself, that he is committed to the Australian market. It's an important market for them. It's a profitable market for them, and they want to remain here.
To JobKeeper, we've seen the numbers released today from the ATO on how many were on JobKeeper at December and September quarters. Have you got a sense of how many will be on JobKeeper in the March quarter?
Well, you can only go on what Treasury had forecast, which was around 1.3 million people, bearing in mind there's just over 1.5 million people in the December quarter who were on JobKeeper. At its peak, we saw 3.8 million people on JobKeeper, and at the end of September we saw 3.6 million. So we've seen a large number of people graduate off JobKeeper, and I think that's the key point out of the ATO data on JobKeeper, that 2.1 million Australians have graduated off JobKeeper in the December quarter compared to the quarter prior, the previous periods, and 520,000 businesses have graduated off JobKeeper. This is another proof point that the Australian economy is strengthening, that the labour market is strengthening. It comes off the back of unemployment falling to 6.6% in December, bearing in mind that Treasury told me that the unemployment rate could have reached a peak of 15% if it wasn't for our economic support. Our participation rate is now at a record high. We've seen a strong performance in the Australian housing market. Prices have picked up, as well as housing starts. We've also seen strong motor vehicle sales. We've seen business and consumer confidence get back to their pre-pandemic levels, and we heard from the Governor of the Reserve Bank just last week that the economic recovery in Australia has been earlier and stronger than first thought.
It's encouraging, but it is also patchy, isn't it? Because you've got some sectors that are still copping it.
Yeah.
And they want reassurance that they're going to have support. You've said there will be some support. Are you looking at things like interest-free loans to keep people on the books, basically for businesses?
Well, we already have a small a medium-sized business loan guarantee, so we partner with the banks to provide that support, and there's been some take-up of that across the business community, which is helping them.
Would you expand that for sector-specific
more
generous treatment?
I'm not going into the specifics of what we may or may not do, but the JobKeeper program was originally scheduled to last for 6 months. We extended it for another 6 months. It was always meant to be a temporary program. It was effectively emergency support, a economy-wide wage subsidy at $1,500. It's estimated to cost around $90 billion.
But you don't want 1.3 million workers falling off a cliff, do you, either?
And so what Treasury said in a review of JobKeeper last year is that as the economy strengthens, which is what we're seeing today, that the JobKeeper program has some adverse or perverse incentives that it prevents labour mobility across the economy. And so if you left such a mechanism in place, those adverse incentives or perverse incentives would remain. We have a number of other programs that are supporting economic activity. We've committed to $29 billion worth of infrastructure spending this year and next. We've got 340,000 new training places. We've got tax cuts that are putting more than $1 billion a month into the pockets of Australian families.
Tourism operators at mum and dad business in farm. You're not going to leave them in the lurch, are you?
Well, we've certainly provided significant support for the tourism sector, and we'll continue to consider what other programs we have, bearing in mind that we announced a program of over $100 million for travel agents recently. But what these JobKeeper numbers show, that even in tourism-dependent regions like Townsville, the number of people on JobKeeper is down by 72% in the December quarter. In an area like Cairns, it's down by 55%. Sunshine Coast and the Gold Coast, even more than that. So even in the tourism-dependent areas, Kieran, there has been a number of people and a number of businesses that have come off JobKeeper. When I was speaking to Alan Joyce recently, he did say that as a result of the border closures that Queensland had with New South Wales and elsewhere, that there was 1,500 flights into Queensland that were cancelled in the month of January alone. This was 200,000 passenger bookings. So when it comes to encouraging people to spend a tourist dollar, then we need to keep the borders open.
A couple of quick ones before you go.
Sure.
Victoria, will you provide additional support for Victoria in the face of this lockdown? Because obviously it's going to be another major economic hit.
We're not considering extra support at this point in time. We've already put out the door $42 billion to the people of Victoria through JobKeeper and the JobSeeker payment. Right now, there are more people on JobKeeper from Victoria than any other state. more than 600,000 in the December quarter. So our support continues to Victorians. What we are focused on is providing any help that Victoria needs to get this cluster, get this virus outbreak under control. Our thoughts are with the Victorian businesses and with the Victorian families who are in lockdown, and the harsh impact that has been having on them. But certainly we hope the Victorian Government and Victorian health authorities are able to get on top of this cluster quickly.
Yeah, we do. We certainly hope and pray for that. Final question, a very concerning allegation in the press today about an alleged rape in the ministerial wing. What does it say about the culture in some offices in this building, if that is the allegation reported today?
Well, I saw those reports as well. These are obviously serious allegations. I understand it's now a matter in the hands of police, so I wouldn't provide a further comment on it at this point.
Treasurer, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Kieran.